All right, hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Chase Thomas Podcast, where I'm still the aforementioned Chase Thomas, coming to you live from Knoxville, Tennessee. Joining me at this time, my good friend, fellow University of Tennessean over there in Oak Ridge, Tennessee, Mr. Stats by Will. Will, good afternoon, sir. How are you?
I'm doing really well. My plan to be American Nathan Fielder by instituting beer sales at 8 a.m. in Louisiana this Saturday is going really well. So beer sales are up.
I like it. Yeah, I don't know. Like, people have been saying, like, LSU's going to get up for that. But the 11 a.m., man, that's tough. That is a tough look.
I don't think time matters as much as people believe it does. If you're like a Central or East Coast, like if you were Stanford coming, then yes. But though I think Stanford would have a problem basically anywhere now. But I don't think it's going to be a big deal. I do think it's much more of a coin flip than a lot of UT fans seem to be indicating.
Well, I could go on and on about that, but that is for a different podcast. We'll see.
Yes.
We shall see how it goes. On this particular podcast, where we ostensibly talk about college basketball, my friend, we kick things off with our Wrong Coach, Wrong Team series that I was thinking about this week of, like, who would be a good fit this week. And we haven't done this coach yet, and he has been there for a sneaky long time now. And, you know, this program now in the Big 12, the best college basketball, they're trying to be the GOAT college basketball just conference with their hires. I don't know if you saw all the Pistons front office folks who just got hired to the Big 12 conference staff. Like, they're dipping their toes and they're going all in. Kansas wins, and just they're going full basketball for the future of the Big 12. And not a bad idea when you look at where they're going and who they already have in the conference. And we touched on that a little bit. But one team that kind of has been under the radar in the conference that I am curious, Jamie Dixon, now been at TCU for a little bit. What do you make of Jamie Dixon to this point at TCU? And do you still think he is the right guy for this program at this moment?
This one's a little complicated. I think so. I'm going to say up front, I think he's the right coach for them because he is an alumnus, right? Mm-hmm. And don't feel like you're going to get a better alumnus for the job, as far as I know, than Jamie Dixon. That's about as good as it's possibly going to get. Mm-hmm. In terms of his actual success there, it's a little complicated. I think he's both been better than the numbers might immediately indicate, and he still has some room for improvement. So, I mean, he's unquestionably the most successful coach they've had there in decades. They have 2 tournament bids in the last 5 years. That's more than they had in the 30 years prior to him being hired. Won 20-plus games 4 times. They have a real identity, which a lot of teams don't. Mm-hmm. They're nasty on the boards, really tough on defense. Overall, a difficult team to play against. They kind of sort of created the like how Iowa State made their little mini run this year. That was a very TCU basketball team. Mm-hmm. Very Jamie Dixon, hard-nosed, not really a team you're excited to play style. I think all of that's really good. And as a reminder, the actual question of is he the right guy, I think it's more or less proven itself to have an answer of yes. But there is the room for improvement. So since Dixon got there, Bart Torvik's got his thing on his site where you can, basically select certain years of time and see, like, how's this program performed against the rest of their conference? And, Dixon's 6 years, for example. They're the 8th best program in the Big 12, which is not, that sounds worse than it is, because every Big 12 program ranks 53rd or better, which is insane. That's like all 10 teams on average being no worse than bubble teams, which is, that's unreal consistency. It's a brutal conference to try and win in, unless you're Kansas. That being said, they've had real success, and they've not really capitalized on it at all in recruiting. And I know, TCU, not really a traditional basketball recruiting hotbed or anything, but the last 2 recruiting classes, 8th, 10th, and 9th in the Big 12. If it was a uniquely tough place to recruit to, I might have some sympathy. But 1, seeing their success on the football side doesn't make me, feel quite as much on that. And then 2, Iowa State has 3 blue chip recruits committed for this next class. Kansas State has multiple 4-stars. West Virginia, not exactly a place the average recruit is jumping to move to necessarily, regularly out recruits TCU. But that all being said, It's aside from like Chris Beard, I would have a hard time naming a coach out there who's worked the transfer portal as well as he has. Like last year's team was almost entirely transfers, and it was the best team he'd had to that point. I do think that given the seniority of their roster, so unless I'm mistaken, and I'm sure like a TCU fan will come and correct this, all of the top 6 or top 7 projected minutes getters are either redshirt juniors or seniors. Like this is an old team. And that's generally a good thing in college basketball, but there's like a point of diminishing returns to that, I think. And it kind of feels like it has to be now or never for them to both be a legitimate top 20 team and B, finally breach the Sweet 16 for the first time in literally 54 years. And it's kind of difficult because sort of legendarily Dixon is this, horrific underperformer in March. Whether I don't think there's like I think you and I are of the opinion that there's not really a common thread between like styles that underachieve in March.
Yeah.
He's probably just been unlucky, but there is that. He needs to get over those demons soon.
Well, it's interesting too. I feel like he's in a bad spot where it's amazing how important timing is in sports, and timing is everything. And guess what? The timing for Jamie Dixon at TCU, Houston, maybe one of the 5 best programs. They're coming into the Big 12. Kelvin Sampson's got that thing humming at an unreal level. Texas Tech, you love what they're doing. Even post Chris Beard, they're a top 25 program. You look at Texas, they've spent a lot of money. Chris Beard's got that program moving in the right direction. You go up and down the list, you talk about Kansas, but I'm just talking about in the state itself. It's just Baylor. I mean, Baylor is one of the 3 best. Like, you just look around the state, and if you're Jamie Dixon, you're like, I mean, what do you want me to do? This is like the best time in college. You could make the case this is the best Texas college basketball has ever been across the state. Like, this is just an unbelievable time to be a Texas college basketball fan, and that's everywhere. So I think TCU is kind of like, I think you have to view everything that they do, and like you said, you have to clean up in the portal like Jamie Dixon has to keep up with just what's going on around you, and just the investment I don't think is the same at a lot of these premier schools around the state of Texas as it is at TCU, which is a still small private school, and there are limitations. Yeah, like, would you like to be Baylor if you're TCU? Would you like to get to that point? It's like, Baylor can do it, we can do it. It's like, it took time, and Baylor, I mean, it's easier said than done to do what Scott Drew has done at Baylor, but I mean, they're at the top of their game. Been one of the 2 best college basketball teams the last 2 years, and I don't see that changing anytime soon. I think Baylor is in really good shape for the foreseeable future. So I think TCU's roadmap to serious contention in the Big 12 is just extremely arduous and extremely complicated. And when you look at it, I mean, 6 years, he's never had a winning record in conference play. That isn't great if you're a TCU fan, but you're also, I don't know. If I'm a Horned Frog, I'm just A, grateful, great mascot, great colors, but B, we just have to get lucky. I think this is a program where they just need the right transfer mix one particular year, and they can break through, because Jamie Dixon is still an elite coach in this conference, I think.
Yeah, I would agree. And, I mean, the part of the problem for him is that, like, even we're talking about Texas, but literally within his own metropolitan area, you have North Texas.
True.
Grant McCasland, like one of the best coaches in America. Like with that looming over your shoulder, and they should, it's kind of like how Tennessee never plays Belmont. TCU should never once schedule North Texas. Don't do it. It's only bad can happen.
I don't think so. No, no. You're not selling me on this. As someone who pushes regional matchups, you need to do it.
From their perspective, they should not. But for our perspective, absolutely, they should. It's
the Dale Ravel tweet. I feel bad for our country, but this is tremendous content. I feel bad for TCU, but this is tremendous content. Next up, ESPN's final top 25 preseason rankings came out. Who jumped out to you, Will Warren?
So people really seem to be all in on North Carolina as number 1. I have a feeling, and we're going to see if this gets borne out or not, of course, that they're going to open as AP number 1. I think it's, judging based on what I've seen, it's going to be between them and Houston. And I think people are going to opt with the, quote, safer choice of the, more prestigious program. Like, I'm thinking of like the average basketball writer. And it's not like a totally indefensible thing. Like I would put North Carolina in my top 4, and I think my top 4 in this rough order would be Gonzaga, Baylor, Houston, UNC, and I think you have a real case for any of those 4 to be number 1. I don't think it's like nothing super offensive there. The things that I'm kind of curious about that I'm keeping tabs on as a metrics guy. One, I think we've talked about Creighton a lot this offseason. Pretty much every like writer type, like ESPN, the Almanac that Jeff Goodman and the 3-Man Weave guys put together, Rothstein, etc., all have Creighton like kind of like 6 to 10 range, right? We're still waiting on Ken Pom to come out, but there are 2 metric systems that have dropped their preseason ratings. Bart Torvik has Creighton 23rd, and Eric Haslam has them 32nd. That's going to be a really interesting thing to watch throughout the year of like who's more right. And my guess is like, as usual, the truth is somewhere in the middle. Like I wouldn't put Creighton in my top 10, but I think they're at least a top 20 team. So I want to see how that bears out. And
they're your number 1 Big East team, aren't they? Or is it Villanova?
Villanova, I think. I mean, on paper, Villanova is the better team, but I don't know how the coaching transfer is going to go. Creighton's probably the superior pick, like on paper. But the 2 that jump out to me of like, I don't understand why this team is where they're at, is a team in the poll, Oregon. We did this exact same thing last year, where Oregon was very unimpressive for most of that season. It was a COVID year, so that being granted. And people put them 12th for no reason. And look what happened. Oregon sucked. I'm looking at Oregon's roster right now. Torvik has them 37th, Haslam 44th. Hoop Explorer had them like in the 30s. And I think that's kind of more fair, like, 33rd, 34th, somewhere in there, than ESPN having them 19th. Because like to me, 19th means you're going to be performing like we think Illinois will or Indiana. Like, and I just don't see it. I don't think that roster is that good. A team that I do think, though, is kind of getting underrated somehow is San Diego State. And we've been on this train all offseason. I think they're a legitimate top 15 team. ESPN has them 21st, which is not like a dramatic underrating. But, I mean, like if they're like a legit top 15 team, as I think they will be, that's like, it's kind of like throwing it back to 2019, the COVID season that got interrupted, where they were that top 10 team the entire way, undefeated for a really long time. I think we're going to see something really special from them this year.
We shall see. We shall see. Changes to March Madness, potentially. Well, what have we always said? Is that March Madness needs to be worked on. We need to continue making it more complicated. It needs to be messed with a little bit more. That's what I've always said.
The thing we really want, we want more gambling ads on TV.
Yes.
During every single commercial break. Especially ones with the Mannings for some reason. Despite that, I am locked in that Peyton has never once downloaded one of those.
Ooh.
Archie, yes. So we need that, and we need March Madness for some ungodly reason to have like 128 teams. Everybody is begging for this. We want Gonzaga to play Mississippi Valley State in front of a crowd of 22.
Oh man, I really hope. I think we're going to see changes no matter what. I think part of the future of college football realignment, I think it's naive to believe that March Madness is going to stay as currently constructed. If a lot of these conferences have to evolve a little bit and have to realign, I don't think it's just going to be the status quo. I just don't think that's going to be how it goes. But I do think there will be enough of a pushback that it won't. It's just too much of a moneymaker. Like, you just look at the ratings and you look at how much money the sport brings in from that time, that I think they're going to want to be extremely careful with what they do. But I do think there will be differences. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if there's more. I could see a scenario where you make it harder for the smaller schools to get in, maybe removing the automatic qualifiers from all these different conferences. That wouldn't surprise me. To get more of the super Power 3, Power 4 conference teams in the big dance. Like, I could see something like that be a gradual shift. But the idea of like just locking it out and only doing the traditional big conferences only, that was thrown out when realignment was really at the forefront a couple months ago. I don't think that will be a thing, but we'll see, because the rosters will continue to get more and more lopsided with NIL and everything else. That if there's one thing we've learned from March, it's that lopsided rosters never lose. They never lose against smaller teams. It's never a thing.
Yeah, they
so
never
why do it?
lose as a 15 seed with a supposed national player of the year or anything.
No, never happens.
So my opinion here is the same as it's always been, which is that expansion is bad and should not happen. Strangely, though, the last time this happened, I do kind of feel like we've arrived on a really good model now, where it's like, really, this should be 64, right? We shouldn't have like play-in crap or whatever. But for what it is, the first four is really entertaining and has been the entire time it's been on. I cannot immediately remember a first 4 year where there wasn't, like, of the 4 games, like one pretty interesting, fun, weird thing that happened. Like even this past year where it was like a couple of them were duds. But like Notre Dame and Rutgers went to overtime. That was weird. That was fun. So I think the first four is pretty cool. I don't think they should expand it even to 72. Like maybe at the very most, and I do not recommend this, but at very most, like you can do 70. You can get in like 2 more 18 and 14 Big Ten teams or whatever. Let Rutgers get in this time again. Why not? And if you choose to do that, like, okay, maybe you can add an extra play-in game or something. Or you can turn it into like a little mini tournament if you do 72. But I think anything beyond that is going to be a really hard sell on fans. It is money, and money will always be made. But the idea of this ever getting to like 96 or something extreme is frankly nauseating.
Yeah, I hope that doesn't happen, but we'll see.
We have a 96 team tournament. 32 of them play in the NIT. We don't need that to become part of the NCAA tournament.
Yeah, let's hope that's the case. Kentucky's most intriguing game on the schedule for you, Will, is what?
Many people are saying it'll be their rematch with St. Peter's in March. No, I'm kidding. So the obvious answer here is the Gonzaga game, right? Because, I mean, really, and we're going to have to see what the AP poll says. That plans to be a matchup of what should be 2 top 5 teams on a Sunday, like marquee game.
So Kentucky's in your preseason top 5.
So 1 to 5, Gonzaga, Baylor, Houston, UNC, Kentucky. I think that's my top 5. And I think UK is going to be in the top 5, like basically no matter what come then, even if Kentucky's only real struggle game before that is Michigan State at a neutral site. And 1, I cannot imagine them really losing that game. 2, even if they do, that's not like a huge hit to your resume. But either way, like Sunday game, I freaking love that Gonzaga's listing it as a neutral site while Kentucky says it's a true road game. That's awesome. Good on that disagreement. I'm really interested in that because that's the toughest opponent they're going to play. But there are 2 games more pertinent to like their season interests, aka winning the SEC, that matter more. Road Tennessee in mid-January is going to be massive for them. I think, really both of the Tennessee games will be huge in deciding the SEC title. I think, they're probably obviously going to fare worse at TBA than they would at Rupp. But that first one is really going to set the tone for the season because, coming into that, Tennessee's schedule is pretty light. Like they've kind of got an easy run-up of sorts to that Kentucky game. Whereas like UK's isn't like, brutal, but you've got to go at Mizzou, who's reloaded, at Alabama, and then, that next Saturday you're at Tennessee. That's a pretty rough stretch. And then closing the season, they will play Arkansas on the road. And I think we're all like in general agreement, Arkansas is probably the 3rd in the 3-team hierarchy at the top of the SEC. They're somewhere, I think they're 3rd. Some people have them 2nd, but either way, that's a really intriguing game because, frankly, the SEC could come down to the final day. It did of sorts this past season. Auburn, escaped blowing it, but it just seems like the SEC always comes down to that final Saturday. And for such a marquee matchup, that's just so good. Like Kentucky, Arkansas to close it out is going to be really interesting as long as both live up to expectations.
I like it. Will, the last thing we end on this, Villanova, the latest in our Ken Palm season in review series. Jay Wright out. We'll see which of our favorite planets in the solar system work out with Coach Neptune here taking over at Villanova. I'm very curious to see how this goes. I think a lot of folks, it's just easy to, when games aren't happening, you see this a lot where you saw Marcus Freeman replacing Brian Kelly, where part of that, there's excitement. Look, Brian Kelly tried to bring him to LSU and that didn't go well. And he's a highly sought after recruiter and coach and defensive mind. And look, and they lose to Ohio State in the opener. They get upset at home to Marshall, and it's like, oh right, games happen, and we really don't know. Like, you can be as energetic and awesome, and everyone can like you, and then games happen. Eventually, games have to happen. And shout out to Shane Beamer at South Carolina, another example of games actually have to happen. The South Carolina Gamecocks, where we are in almost mid-October, who have yet to win an SEC game this fall. You look at it, and you're like, all right, well, we'll see. He's replacing maybe one of the 10 best college basketball coaches of all time. Like, that's a really, really hard thing to do. Maybe he can keep this thing humming, but we don't know. Villanova's hard to forecast because you are walking in. This is one of the biggest jobs to fill what Jay Wright was doing. And he did an unbelievable job getting guys to the pros, unbelievable offensive strategy. It worked. He was kind of ahead of his time in a lot of ways. Like, we'll just see. Like, I think it could go either way, which is a way of couching it. But I'm like, look, man, I don't know. Jay Wright's one of the best, and my instinct is like, he won't be as good because most aren't. But you also can go the Hubert Davis route where you're like, man, it's gonna be really, really hard to follow Roy Williams. Then he does what he does. And it's like, we have no idea. John Schneider, like, we'll see at Duke. He's literally following Coach K. Expectations are going to be insane, and it's a lot to live up. It's a lot of stress, and we'll see. I throw that out a lot, but I'm like, I don't know. People get so caught up in the off-season press conferences and the excitement and all this, that, and the other. And it's like, all right, maybe. We've seen it go the other way, too. Which way are you leaning for Villanova and where they're going into next season and going forward?
I feel all right about them. The interesting thing with Neptune is, it's going to be the real sell on him will be like these first few games they play. So I don't know how many people have checked, but they've got like quite the tricky start to the season. So first 5, 2 of these are obvious toss-offs. LaSalle and Delaware State, who cares? Mm-hmm. But in those 5, there's 3 games away from home. Road Temple, never an easy place to win. Road Michigan State, which is a real bold schedule choice. And Iowa State at a neutral site. If he gets out of those at 2-1, I think that's a win. That's like a huge success. If you can escape, and they're going to be favored in all 3, but if you can escape that at 2-1, you're going to be okay, I think. I feel that, like, he's lucky that he's walking into a situation where there's a good talent baseline. I think unquestionably they have one of, I would say, the 15 most talented rosters in college basketball this year. And that sets your floor at, like, if things go south within a realistic level of south, you're still one of, like, the top 30 or so teams out there. You're going to make the tournament. You're going to be fine. And if you kind of go south a little bit, people will say, oh, it's his first year. It's his second year ever as a head coach. Don't freak out. But they're set up pretty well. I think they're going to be really good offensively again. It's going to be the exact same system, so I don't have a ton of reason to expect much of a lapse offensively. But I do think that given their personnel, I'm going to be interested to see what they do defensively. Neptune, he had a really good year at Fordham. I know 16-16 doesn't pop on the paper. It was his defense that really worked best, but they just didn't have athletes to score. Terrible shooting all around for them. But I think with a better system, better group of players, and a year under his belt of experience, I think he's going to be fine. And like you said, I don't expect him to be as successful as Jay Wright. The real baseline here is just like keep it going and then add your own stuff. You don't want to be like a copy of a copy of a copy, you want to be like Jay Wright, but like, I don't think you can be Jay Wright, but what I'm getting at is you want to be yourself, but encourage like those same traditions to keep carrying on, keep the best of what was going on, and to continue to build for the future. I think they're going to be all right, honestly.
Mm-hmm. But we'll have to see. Like, I mean,
that's the fun of this. You really don't know until you know.
Never trust someone who's like home run hire. He's going to be great. Like,
that's literally every single hire.
Yes.
From the journalists on Twitter is just like greatest hire of all time.
Players love him. People behind the scenes are all in. Like, just they were lucky to get him. You just hear that all across the board, and it's like games happen, and it's like, what happens if they're 8-8 through 16 games, and you're like,
yeah, exactly. People are just like, well, I don't know, man. Give him time. It's like, okay, we're giving him time.
And then you're like, all right, how much time? It's just people like who they like, and it's a narrative thing. It's a big thing. Is there a game?
I will say, I do find it really interesting before we leave here. Yeah. They don't have anybody committed for 2023. Like, not a single player is committed at the moment. So, not that everybody has to do the John Shire thing of immediately coming in and having the best class in college basketball. But obviously, I think they're going to have to fix that soon because Brandon Slater and Caleb Daniels lose eligibility after this year. So, got to replace those guys.
It's easier said than done keeping a top 10 program top 10 in college basketball. It's a lot of stuff going into it, but should be interesting, should be fun. Villanova is one of the more fun teams to watch unless they're playing the Tennessee Volunteers, in which case it is not a good time and I'm not having fun. Will, do you have a stat of the week for us this week?
No stats other than I have people, I'm sure will be thrilled to hear this. I started working on the season preview for Tennessee last night.
Okay.
And I will save it for the preview, but the statistical comps for Zakai Ziegler last year as a freshman are genuinely hilarious.
Okay.
Whereas like of the 6 closest comparisons, 1 was obviously Kennedy Chandler, and 4 of the other 6 were future NBA guys. So there you go.
I like it. Stats by Will. Find him on Twitter. Stats by Will. Bookmark the great website and his great writing that coming back very soon. It's almost college basketball season again. Bookmark statsbywill.com. Do it today. And
it's almost back, folks. We're going to be unveiling some good jokes like Kyle Saturn. And Kyle's a really big fan of the Saturn View. Mm-hmm. It's his favorite car. So yeah, we're workshopping these.
Man, Saturns, those were someone in my neighborhood growing up had a Saturn. And it was just always like one of those cars you look at and you're like, that car is going to make it 37 years. But it looked old when you got it. Like when you buy a Saturn, if you buy it new, it looks 10 years old off the lot. It was one of those, but it just kept going. It was a beater. It's
like the Wisconsin front court of cars.
That's a great comparison.
They just look the exact same no matter like when it was bought.
Yes. 100%. And never buy a Saturn new. So not a future sponsor of the podcast.
No, well, they're defunct now, I think.
Yeah.
So.
I wonder when the last year they made it. Who cares? Stats I Will. Thank you as always, my friend. And I will talk to you next week.